Mr. Ambassador, thank you for having some time to do this interview with us today. I hope our readers and viewers will find it being interesting. The last time we spoke was a little bit over than a month ago when the conflict has just started. It was hard to predict what will happen next and what the consequences will look like. So the first question will be, how do you appreciate the impact of the war on the Republic of Moldova?
Well, the impact of the war has been quite hard in more than one ways. First is the obvious and the immediate impact, and that is the refugee flow. And in this respect, the response of the authorities and response of the Moldovan people has really been remarkable, because this process has been really well organized. I have been to Palanca myself. I have seen the camps, how well the process is organized from the moment that refugees would arrive at the border and then move on, most of them towards the EU, towards Romania. And also the response of the people, because almost 95% of the refugees that have stayed in Republica Moldova are staying with families. But this means also that first that the process has been managed well, so that the majority of the refugees have already moved on towards the EU, which is also, of course, putting less strain on the resources of the country. But of course it is important for the international community to support Republic of Moldova handling this big number of refugees, both for the immediate needs and also for the longer term. And second, I think we need to talk also about longer term impact, and we can discuss that in more detail. The impact of the war, for instance, on the Moldovan economy, because clearly Ukraine is an important trading partner for Republic of Moldova, and so is Russia. So both the trade with Ukraine and Russia has been affected, and this is a reality that we need to address as well.
Keeping this in mind, from the very beginning, the European Union said that, clearly stated that it will support our country no matter what, and indeed we have seen this support. Europe intervened with help at different stages. Because we are a small country, we have a modest budget, and managing the refugee crisis is quite a difficulty for us. But the refugees are still crossing the border, and in this way I'd like to ask you if Europe will continue this support, because if the situation worsens, I hope not, but if it does, we will face an even greater wave of problems.
Yes, in fact, the European Union and its member states, through the civilian protection mechanism, have offered quite a lot of support. In fact, it has been demand-driven. Basically, this has been Moldovan institutions that have asked for particular things, be it tents or electricity generators. And by now, 17 EU member states have provided assistance worth approximately 14 million euros to the Republic of Moldova, and this support keeps coming in. So almost every day we have more information about new provisions of support. But and this is largely really for this worst case scenario if the number of refugees would increase dramatically, because for instance, well, the tents, they are not necessarily with the number of refugees that are there, but if the situation would get worse, then they would be definitely needed. And also our support is not just about providing these very tangible items, it's also about providing people. For instance, there has been a recent agreement with the EU Border Management Agency Frontex, which has already sent its people here to the Republic of Moldova to help the border guards with processing the refugee flows. Similarly, the UBAM mission, which is covering both Republic of Moldova and Ukraine, and previously was based in Chișinău and in Odessa, now it has relocated just to Chișinău, and its people are also at the crossing points, helping the people that would need assistance. So this assistance is coming, We are also thinking about this longer-term perspective because, as I was mentioning, this is not just about the immediate crisis of the refugees, so we are also looking at ways how we can provide more support to the Republic of Moldova for the longer term, for supporting the sustainable development of the country and its economy.
As you mentioned, the war also has a strong impact on our economy, which has been already weakened by the energy crisis, which we have been dealing at the beginning of the winter and still continue to face it. Europe has claimed several times that this could be even called as an energy blackmail, and this is why I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, were these energy problems a way to perhaps destabilize or intimidate our countries and other EU countries, and maybe it is somehow connected to what is happening now in Ukraine?
Well, the High Representative and Vice President Borrell has said that the gas has been used as a weapon. And there have been elements that we could see that, for instance, the gas storage facilities had not been filled during the winter to the extent that they usually would be. So what has been the planning? Of course, it is very difficult to speculate, but the reality is that this has had destabilizing effect. It has had adverse economic effect across the European continent because the gas prices have gone up everywhere, but the Republic of Moldova has been hit harder than others just because of the reason that the country is poorer. And also that is the reason why the European Union has been also coming with assistance in this area. Last year in December there was basically at record speed provided 60 million euro assistance to the Republic of Moldova as budget support to help the vulnerable groups of people with subsidies to cope with the rising gas prices. Similarly, this year there has been put in place a program that provides assistance to those particularly vulnerable groups like families with many children or elderly or disabled. So we are providing that practical assistance, but it's also about strengthening the energy resilience and energy independence of the country. And that is, again, we're getting to the longer term engagement with the country. So it is about providing technical expertise, how to step up the capacities of the country to purchase gas elsewhere if need be, or how to increase energy efficiency across the country, where we are working already for a long time, but now it is in fact the period when we are stepping up our work on very tangible projects as well.
Due to the war, Moldova also has lost some important economical markets for our country. I'm talking about Ukraine and Belarus, to which we exported a lot of our products and from which we got approximately 20% of imported production. We went through a similar situation earlier with the Russian embargoes, when everybody thought that our economy would be grounded because of that. But our economic agents quickly refocused with the help of the EU, of course, and found new markets. So I'd like to ask you if Europe will continue to support our business on its way of finding new markets now in the situation which we are dealing with.
Absolutely, the European Union is interested in having even more cooperation with the Republic of Moldova. Already by now, the European Union has become by far the largest export market for Moldovan producers, with 2/3 of Moldovan exports going to the EU member states. In fact, we recently produced this information that went viral because many people were still thinking that Russia is the biggest export partner, and this is not reality, and this, I think, is good for the sustainability of your economy, especially in these situations like the current one, that you are in the very much predictable European markets where you can sell your products. Having said that, for having more Moldovan products, it is also about doing the homework. Because especially in the agricultural area, it is important that the exports are meeting the European Union standards, so that the health and safety first and foremost. So we are looking also at ways how we can expand that. There is also a dialogue between the Moldovan government and the European institutions on how to perhaps increase these possibilities for Moldovan producers in the future. But I think this will be one more stimulus to Moldovan exporters to look even more into European markets in the future.
Still talking about economics, but slowly switching it to politics, how do you appreciate the Chișinău's hesitation of joining sanctions against Russia?
Well, the Moldovan authorities have very clearly explained the reasoning, and so we have taken a note of the grounds, which was that the Moldovan government has been very clear about condemning the Russian invasion in Ukraine, but at the same time that the country feels too vulnerable to implement the European Union sanctions. And we take note of that fact, but we also take note of, with appreciation, really, this very consistent support by the Republic of Moldova to the steps that the European Union has either initiated or been supporting internationally, for instance at the United Nations, where Moldova with 140 other member states condemned this Russian invasion in Ukraine, which is a really unprecedented high number of countries all across the world coming together on that. But not only about the United Nations, it has been also very consistent with supporting similar initiatives, for instance at the Council of Europe.
But is Europe considering a possible invasion to Moldova?
Well, we do not see grounds for such consideration at present. We have been sending very clear signals, we as European Union, that the big importance that we attach to cooperation with the Republic of Moldova, obviously as an independent country. So the number of high-level visitors from the European Union alone this month has been higher than in the past 3 years. The EU member states have also had these visits of solidarity. I think these are not just about bringing tangible offers of support, like having more support for the refugees, but it has been also very important symbolically, because it is the clearest way how we collectively can show that we are doing our utmost, that the Republic of Moldova is seen as a partner for us by everyone. From our side, we are working here in the Republic of Moldova like other European Union member states. In fact, most of the European Union embassies, and definitely our delegation, has increased its staff considerably to help address this crisis that the country is facing.
To avoid an invasion, what precautionary measures have been taken or will be taken?
You can see this precautionary element in the visits and in the support of Republic of Moldova, because this is the best way how we can show our support for the country. But of course, European Union is not a military alliance, so this is not something about building up of the military aspect. Having said that, even on security, we have had the first ever security and political consultations also last month with the Minister Popescu and Deputy Secretary General Mora on the European side, where these security issues were also discussed, also how to step up the cooperation in the security area, how to also strengthen the resilience of the country.
But do you admit that an escalation of the conflict could come only not from without, but from the within of the Republic of Moldova? I'm talking about the regions which are mostly Russian-speaking and which people from which clearly support the aggression in Ukraine.
I think that the language of people is of secondary importance, frankly. I come from Latvia, and we have a big minority, several minorities. We have seven large minorities, and the fact that they are belonging to a minority doesn't mean that they would be less loyal to the country or its security. So what I think is important to continue is informing all citizens of Republica Moldova, irrespective of their place of residence, of the true picture of the war. In other words, to counter disinformation, which is unfortunately widespread, which we are also countering from our side, sharing information about the war and some of the myths that are surrounding the war. So I think this is the avenue that needs to be continued, and that's why we also as the European Union are engaging all across the Republic of Moldova with our projects so that all citizens of the Republic of Moldova are engaged on this path of European integration, irrespective of how that path will develop, but which will make the country more resilient to outside shocks, more democratic from the inside.
The new geopolitical configuration, the huge solidarity formed around Ukraine. Do you think this creates opportunities and possibilities for the settlement of the Transnistrian conflict? Because the last weeks we see that the so-called authorities from Tiraspol have adopted a more neutral position, and they do not support Russia so visibly clear as they did before. So could this conflict that has been smoldering for 30 years, in a diplomatic way, of course, be over now?
First, it is, I think, a very good, encouraging sign that the de facto authorities have indeed been very careful to distance themselves from any statements that would put the region in the limelight. Also, they have been quick to dispel disinformation that has been spread around about Transnistria and its hypothetical involvement in the conflict. So the peaceful solution, unfortunately, I don't think this is something that can happen immediately, because the process for that, and a process that we support as the European Union, is a 5+2, where both Transnistria and de facto authorities and the Chișinău government are engaged. But since two of the countries that are engaged in that process, namely Russia and Ukraine, are currently in a situation of war, then it is unlikely that this process could move ahead immediately. Having said that, I think it is very also important that the dialogue between the Tiraspol de facto authorities and Chișinău has been continuing, that there are meetings on a working level, that these practical issues are being addressed and hopefully resolved also bilaterally. And it is important to maintain also the focus on the longer term, so that we do have this framework of 5+2, where eventually the peaceful solution should be found.
At the same time, we've seen statements from Europe which says that there will be taken actions to secure the Transnistrian segment of the Ukrainian-Moldovan border. And I'd like to ask you, which actions can be done to finally reduce the risks of smuggling and illegalities, which we all know that are happening there?
I think there are two components. One is the bilateral component of cooperation between Republic of Moldova and Ukraine, and second, what support can be provided by the European Union. So on the first track, obviously it is about the bilateral cooperation between the two countries. Where our support can come in is through the UBAM mission, so the European Union Border Assistance Mission, which has been working both with Moldova and with Ukraine, and that can be engaged if the two countries wish so, to be even more engaged on monitoring the segment of the border between Republic of Moldova and Ukraine, also on the resistance segment. So this is possibly for the future.
And I also would like to talk about the integration of Moldova into the European Union. I understand that we still have some conditions to fulfill to reach this ultimate goal, but which are the conditions that still remain on the list, and how fast should we move in this direction?
Well, first, there is not more than just some conditions. There are really many conditions that any country that would like to become a member state of the European Union would need to fulfill. To give you an idea, in the past, this process has been, after the formal part, has been conducted through a questionnaire which has hundreds of pages and thousands of very detailed questions. So at this moment we are not there yet, because this process has been very recent and it has been so far remarkably fast, because this request letter by the Republic of Moldova for membership application was sent to the European Union on the 27th of February, and already on the 10th of March the European Council tasked the European Commission to prepare an opinion on this application. At present we do not have the timeline for that opinion, so we do not know how exactly it will take place, in what time frame, whether it will be the hundreds of pages of questionnaire or it would be conducted differently. This is for the future. So I think what you can be sure that there will be lots of hard work ahead. But having said that, that hard work is building on what you as a country have been doing for rather many years, in fact since the moment of signing of the association agreement, because all the steps that the Republic of Moldova is doing jointly with the European Union is advancing it closer to the European standards. And that is, I think, very good in itself, irrespective of what is the final point of destination. Because if your food becomes safer, it's good for the Moldovan citizens. If the country becomes more democratic, it's good for the Moldovan citizens. If the corruption is eradicated, it is good for the Moldovan citizens. So what comes on top of this is for the future to be seen, but I think it is important to continue with these reforms irrespective of how we proceed from here and what will be the speed.
What about being in the CIS? How compatible is this status with integration into the European Union?
The Republic of Moldova is a member of the CIS, and it has been possible to reconcile that with the implementation of, for instance, of the DCFTA and association agreement. Having said that, this again will be the issue for the future on seeing on how compatible this is. I also took note of the statement by President Sandu, who said that, I think in early March, that when Republic of Moldova gets closer to the European Union, it would give up on the CIS membership. This is the sovereign choice of the Republic of Moldova and its citizens. So when, how and what decisions to take, this will be up to you collectively.
Also, polls made in Moldova show that the number of citizens who agree with the idea of joining the Union by uniting with Romania, though it's not an imposing number, but it's constantly increasing. What do you think about this route of, to follow for us? As
a European Union ambassador, I cannot go much in depth of the domestic political choices of the host country. So my answer would be rather similar to the previous question. It is about indeed the political choices of the citizens of the country, how they see their future, what is the mechanism they want to pursue, and that is a matter of in-depth political discussion within the country, among its citizens, among its political forces. so how the country sees its future, and that is your decision collectively.
Also, because of the conflict, there is a lack of security in the whole region. Could rapprochement with the European Union ensure that we can not worry so much about this security issue, but without joining NATO?
Well, first, the fact is that Moldova is constitutionally neutral country, and I think this is also one of the elements that has been brought to the foreground during the war in Ukraine. European Union has countries that are neutral, so this is perfectly compatible with European Union membership if we get to that stage. But in general, I would say that again, it's about building the resilience of the country. The more European Republic of Moldova becomes, the more prosperous you become, the more democratic you become, the more resilient you will become also to outside shocks. So you will have society that will be cohesive, that will be more prosperous, and I would say that such a society also can address external challenges better than a country that is not democratic or is reliant on unstable markets. So I think you are on a good path.
Thank you for this interesting discussion. It was a pleasure to find your points of view.
Thank you very much.